My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old. 2 years ago, my husband Robert died of a heart attack. We'd been married for 38 years, and suddenly I was alone in our Manchester house, trying to figure out how to live without him. We had one son, David, who married Claire 5 years ago. I tried to love Claire like my own daughter, but she made it difficult from the beginning. The rain was drumming against my kitchen window when David called that October morning. "Mom, Claire and I have some news," he said excitedly. "We're expecting our first baby." I should have been overjoyed about becoming a grandmother. Instead, I felt worried because I knew Claire would become even more important in David's life. "That's wonderful, love," I managed to say. "When is the baby due?" "March," he replied. "Claire wants to have a family gathering to announce it to everyone." The gathering was at David and Claire's modern house in Didsbury 2 weeks later. The October evening was cold and damp as I walked up their driveway in my best dress, carrying a small teddy bear I'd found in a charity shop. The house was full of people. Claire's family, friends, everyone dressed in expensive clothes. I felt suddenly small and old in my shabby dress. "Oh, Margaret's here," Claire announced, her voice carrying that tone she used when being politely unwelcome. As David got me wine, I heard Claire talking to her mother in the kitchen. The modern house had terrible acoustics. "I still can't believe David insists on inviting her to everything," Claire said. "She's so depressing since Robert died, always wearing those old clothes and talking about money problems." My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I pretended not to hear. We gathered in the living room as Claire showed off ultrasound pictures. When the phone reached me, I looked at the tiny baby image and smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Oh, how lovely," I said softly. "Robert would have been so happy to see this." Claire's face changed immediately. She snatched the phone from my hands. "Well, he's not here, is he?" she said sharply. The room went quiet. "And honestly, Margaret, you need to stop bringing him up all the time. It's been 2 years. People move on." The silence was deafening. I felt everyone's eyes on me. "I mean, really," she continued, addressing the room. "Every conversation, it's always about Robert this, Robert that. We're trying to celebrate new life here." She turned back to me with her cruelest words. "Maybe if you'd learn to be interesting, on your own, instead of just being someone's wife, you'd have something else to talk about. But I suppose at your age, it's too late to develop a personality." Claire's mother actually laughed. Well, someone had to say it. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking. "I think I should go." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Claire said dismissively. "Sit down and try to think of something cheerful to say for once." But I was already heading for the door. David started to follow. "Mom, wait," he called. But I was already outside in the cold Manchester night. David called the next morning. "Mom, I'm sorry about last night." Claire didn't mean it. Pregnancy hormones. "Did you defend me?" I asked quietly. Long pause. I was shocked. It happened so fast. "That's not what I asked." "Did you defend me?" I spoke to her afterward. "She feels bad. But you didn't defend me when it mattered." "Mom, can't we just move past it?" I hung up and sat in my kitchen, listening to the rain. My son hadn't stood up for me when his wife humiliated me publicly. For 3 weeks I barely left the house. Then something changed everything. I was sorting through Robert's papers when I found a letter from a London solicitor, dated just before Robert died. My hands trembled as I read it. Robert had inherited a house in Paris from his uncle, Maurice, and never told me. There were photographs of a beautiful townhouse with blue shutters. Documents suggested the property was worth considerable money. I called the solicitor immediately. "Mrs. Thompson," said Mr. Hartwell, "I wondered when I might hear from you." Robert died before he could respond. "I'm only finding this now. My condolences. As his widow, you're now the legal owner. The house is vacant and ready for occupancy. How much is it worth?" "Around £800,000, possibly more. Excellent location in the Margaret district. £800,000. I'd been living like a pauper, worrying about every penny. That evening, I made a life-changing decision. I was going to Paris, not to sell the house, but to live in it. I didn't tell David about my plans. Instead, I spent the next week making arrangements quietly. I contacted the property management company in Paris, arranged for my neighbor to collect my mail, and bought a one-way ticket to Paris. The morning I left Manchester, it was raining. As usual, I took one last look at the terraced house where I'd lived for 38 years, locked the door, and walked to the train station with just 2 suitcases. The Eurostar journey to Paris felt like traveling to another world. As the English countryside gave way to French fields, I felt something inside me shifting. For 2 years, I'd felt like I was just existing, going through the motions of life, without really living. But now, watching the landscape change outside the train window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Paris in December was cold, but beautiful. The city was decorated for Christmas, and even though it was overcast, there was something magical about the busy streets and the sound of French voices. All around me, I took a taxi from Gare du Nord to the Marais district, my heart pounding with nervousness and excitement. The house was more beautiful than the photographs had suggested. It was a narrow 4-story building, squeezed between a bakery and a small art gallery, on a cobblestone street that looked like something from a movie. The blue shutters were exactly as they'd appeared in the photos, and there were window boxes that someone had planted with winter flowers. I used the key the property management company had sent me and stepped inside my new home. The interior was stunning. Maurice had clearly had excellent taste. The rooms were furnished with antique furniture and artwork, and everything had been beautifully maintained. There was a small but efficient kitchen, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and upstairs, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. I was exploring the upper floors when I heard footsteps on the stairs, leading to what must have been the flat above. A few minutes later, there was a gentle knock on my door. I opened it to find a man about my age, tall and distinguished looking, with gray hair and kind eyes. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers from the market. "Bonjour," he said in accented English. "You must be Madame Thompson. I am Philippe Dubois. I live upstairs." So this was the man who'd been interested in buying the house. I'd expected someone younger, perhaps a property developer. Instead, I found myself looking at someone who seemed as nervous as I felt. "Please, come in," I said, stepping aside. Philippe entered and looked around the room with obvious affection. "I hope you don't mind me coming down to introduce myself. I have been living upstairs for 3 years now, since Maurice passed away. The property company arranged it as temporary housing, while they sorted out the inheritance, but I have grown to love this place very much." He handed me the flowers. "These are from the market around the corner. I thought you might like them to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "They're lovely." We sat in the living room, and Philippe told me about the neighborhood. He was a recently retired university professor who'd taught literature. His wife had died 4 years ago, and he'd moved to Paris from Lyon to start fresh. "Maurice was a wonderful man," Philippe said. "He told me many stories about his nephew Robert in England. He was very proud of him. Robert never mentioned inheriting this place." I said, "I only found out after he died." Philippe nodded thoughtfully. "Maurice said Robert wanted to surprise you with a trip to Paris for your 40th wedding anniversary. But then Maurice became ill, and Robert was busy with work, and then..." He shrugged in that particularly French way. I felt a pang of sadness, mixed with love. Robert had been planning a surprise for me, even at the end. Over the next few weeks, Philippe became my guide to Parisian life. He showed me where to shop for groceries, which bakery had the best bread, and how to navigate the metro system. He was patient with my terrible French, and didn't seem to mind when I needed help with simple tasks, like understanding my electricity bill. What surprised me most was how easily I adapted to life in Paris. The city had a rhythm that suited me. I loved walking through the narrow streets of the Marais, browsing the small shops and markets. I loved sitting in cafes with a coffee and a book, watching the world go by. I even started taking French lessons at a local community center. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not Robert's wife, not David's mother, not the grieving widow that everyone pitied. just Margaret, a woman discovering what she liked and what she wanted from life. Philippe and I began spending more time together. What started as neighborly help became genuine friendship. He was intelligent and funny, and we shared a love of books and art. He cooked dinner for me sometimes, teaching me to make proper French dishes, and I made him traditional English meals that reminded him of a year he'd spent studying at Oxford. One evening in January, as we sat by the fireplace in my living room, sharing a bottle of wine, Philippe told me something that surprised me. "I was not entirely honest when I first met you," he said. "I did inquire about buying this house, but not for the reasons you might." I looked at him curiously. I fell in love with this place because it felt like home for the first time since my wife died. But more than that, I hoped that if I owned it, Robert's family might visit sometimes. Maurice talked about you so much that I felt like I knew you. I thought perhaps if you came to Paris, I might have the chance to meet the woman Maurice described as the perfect wife for my nephew. My cheeks warmed. Maurice said that. He did. He said Robert was the luckiest man in England because he'd found a woman who was both beautiful and kind, someone who made their house a real home. I felt tears prick my eyes. I don't feel very beautiful or kind lately. My daughter-in-law made that quite clear. Philippe frowned. What do you mean? I found myself telling him the whole story of that terrible evening at David's house. Philippe listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This woman, she is very foolish, and your son, I think he is a coward." The bluntness of his assessment made me laugh despite myself. "In France," Philippe continued, "we have great respect for our elders, especially our mothers. What this woman did would be considered very shameful, and for your son not to defend you," he shook his head. "This is not acceptable." It felt good to have someone validate my feelings instead of telling me to just get over it. Winter in Paris was cold but beautiful. I loved walking along the Seine when it was misty, visiting museums on rainy afternoons, and discovering new neighborhoods. Philippe often joined me on these adventures, and I began to realize that what I was feeling for him was more than friendship. The realization frightened me at first. I'd been married to Robert for 38 years. Was it wrong to have feelings for another man so soon after becoming a widow? But then I remembered Claire's words about learning to be interesting on my own, and I decided that maybe having feelings for Philippe was part of becoming my own person. David called me regularly, but our conversations were strained. He kept asking when I was coming back to Manchester, and I kept avoiding the question. I hadn't told him about the house or my inheritance. Some instinct made me keep that information to myself. "Mum, you've been gone for 3 months," he said during a call in March. "Claire's about to have the baby. Don't you want to be here for your grandchild?" "I want to be where I'm welcome," I replied. "Of course you're welcome." Claire said she was sorry about what happened. "Did she say it to me?" "No, she said it to you." "There's a difference, David." I could hear his frustration through the phone. "What do you want from me, Mum? I can't change what happened. I wanted you to stand up for me when it mattered, but you didn't. And now I'm building a life where people treat me with respect." "What people? You don't know anyone in Paris." "I know more people here than you think," I said quietly. The truth was, I'd made several friends through my French classes and the local community center. There was Marie, a widow my age, who'd become my walking companion. There was Jean-Claude, who ran the bakery downstairs and always saved me the best croissants. And there was Philippe, who'd become so much more than a neighbor. Spring in Paris was magic. The city came alive with flowers and outdoor cafes, and I found myself happier than I'd been in years, maybe decades. Philippe and I had grown closer, though we were both cautious about rushing into anything. We were two people who'd been deeply married to other people, and we understood the complexity of starting over. One warm April evening, as we walked along the Seine, after dinner, Philippe stopped suddenly. "Margaret," he said, "I have something to tell you." My heart skipped. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it may be too soon, and I know we are both still grieving our spouses, But I needed you to know. I looked at this kind, intelligent man who'd shown me more respect and care in 6 months than my daughter-in-law had shown me in 5 years. And I realized I felt the same way. I'm falling in love with you too, I said. He took my hands and then perhaps we can fall together, slowly and carefully, like two people who understand how precious love is. That night, I called David to tell him about Philippe. His reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Mom, you barely know this man. How can you be in a relationship already? It's only been 2 years since Dad died. Your father has been gone for 2 years, David. I'm 62 years old, not dead myself. But what do you really know about this Philippe? He could be after your money. I almost laughed at that. David had no idea about my inheritance. No idea that I was probably wealthier than he was. Philippe has his own money, I said calmly. He's a retired professor with a good pension. And more importantly, he treats me with kindness and respect. I just think you're being impulsive. This isn't like you, Mom. Maybe the old me was too careful, too worried about what other people thought. Maybe it's time I started living for myself. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Claire had the baby. A little girl. We named her Emma. My heart clenched. My granddaughter had been born, and I wasn't there. Congratulations, I managed to say. Is everyone healthy? Yes, she's perfect. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. She has Claire's eyes but my nose. I felt tears start to fall. Despite everything, I wanted to be there for this moment. I wanted to hold my granddaughter and welcome her into the world. Would you like me to come visit? I asked hesitantly. I'll have to talk to Claire. She's still upset about you leaving so suddenly. The fact that my son had to ask his wife's permission for me to meet my granddaughter was like a slap in the face. I understand, I said quietly. Let me know what she decides. I hung up and cried for an hour. Philippe found me on my sofa, surrounded by tissues, and simply held me while I sobbed out all my hurt and frustration. She is punishing you, he said when I'd calmed down enough to explain. This woman, she wants to control your relationship with your son and your grandchild. What am I supposed to do? If I fight with her, I lose David completely. If I don't fight, I lose him anyway. Philippe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, In my experience, bullies only understand strength. Perhaps it is time for her to learn that you are not as powerless as she thinks. 2 weeks later, David called with Claire's decision. I could have her visit for 1 day, but I had to promise not to upset Claire or interfere with their parenting choices. I had to stay in a hotel, not with them, and I couldn't bring Philippe. The conditions were so humiliating that I almost said no, but the thought of my granddaughter made me swallow my pride. I'll come, I said. I flew back to Manchester on a gray May morning, my heart heavy with apprehension. The city looked smaller and drearier than I remembered after months in Paris. I took a taxi to my old house, which looked neglected and sad with its empty windows. I'd arranged to meet David at a cafe near his house, neutral ground where we could talk before I met the babe. He looked tired when he arrived, and I realized that new parenthood was taking its toll. You look different, he said, studying my face. I suppose I did look different. I'd been eating better, walking more, and for the first time in years I felt attracted. I'd bought new clothes in Paris, learned to do my hair differently, and Philippe's obvious admiration had given me confidence I'd forgotten I could have. I'm happy, I said simply. David frowned. You're happy living away from your family. I'm happy living where I'm treated with respect. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then David said, Claire wants to apologize for what she said. She knows she went too far. Does she? Or does she want to apologize because she needs me to babysit sometimes now that she has a baby? David's face told me I'd hit the mark. Mom, can't we just put this behind us? Family is more important than holding grudges. You're right, I said. Family is important. That's why you should have defended me when your wife humiliated me in front of a room full of people. I've apologized for that. What more do you want? I want to know that it won't happen again. I want to know that you'll stand up for me if she treats me badly again. David shifted uncomfortably. She won't. She's learned her lesson. That's not what I asked. Mom, Please, can't we just focus on Emma? She's beautiful, and I want you to meet her. We walked to his house in silence. Claire answered the door holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink blankets. She looked tired but was making an obvious effort to be pleasant. Margaret, she said with a forced smile. Thank you for coming. Would you like to hold her? I took my granddaughter in my arms and felt my heart break open with love. She was perfect, with tiny fingers and the softest skin I'd ever touched. She looked up at me with dark blue eyes that reminded me so much of David. As a baby, she's beautiful, I whispered, and for a moment, all the hurt and anger faded away. Claire made tea, and we sat in her living room, making careful conversation about the baby. Claire was clearly trying to be nice, but there was something performative about it, like she was acting out a script. I'm sorry about what I said at the dinner party, she said eventually. I was stressed about the pregnancy, and I spoke without thinking. Thank you, I said, though the apology felt hollow. I hope we can move forward and focus on what's best for Emma. She needs her grandmother in her life. There it was. She needed me now, so I was suddenly welcome again. We spent a pleasant but superficial afternoon talking about the baby and avoiding any mention of my life in Paris. When it was time for me to leave, Claire walked me to the door. I hope you'll consider moving back to Manchester, she said. Emma will need you as she grows up. I'll think about it, I said non-committally. That evening, I sat in my hotel room and called Philippe. Just hearing his voice made me feel better. How was it? He asked. Strange, she apologized, but only because she wants something from me now, and David still won't stand up to her. So what will you do? I'm going to offer them something they want, but on my terms. The next morning, I met David for breakfast. Before catching my flight back to Paris, I'd made a decision during the sleepless night, and I felt calm and clear about what I needed to do. I have something to tell you, I said. Your father left me a house in Paris. That's where I've been living. David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What? I explained about Uncle Maurice's inheritance, about the beautiful house in the Marais, about my new life in Paris. David's expression went through several stages: confusion, surprise, and then something that looked like calculation. Mom, that's wonderful, he said finally. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I needed to figure out who I was without everyone telling me what I should do. So you're rich now? The question came out more bluntly than he probably intended. I'm comfortable, I said carefully. I could see the wheels turning in his head. Suddenly, his mother wasn't just a lonely widow to be managed and appeased. She was a woman with property and money. This changes things, he said. Maybe Claire and I could visit you in Paris sometime. It would be good for Emma to experience other cultures. Maybe, I said. But David, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was when I lived here. I won't accept being treated badly. Not by anyone, including family. Of course not, he said quickly. Things will be different now. I doubted that, but I didn't argue. Instead, I made my offer. I want to be part of Emma's life. I'd like to set up a trust fund for her education, and I'd like to have her visit me in Paris when she's older. But I have conditions. David leaned forward eagerly. I will not tolerate any more public humiliation from Claire. If she has a problem with me, she can discuss it privately like an adult. And you, I looked him straight in the eye, need to decide whether you're going to be a husband who lets his wife bully his mother, or a son who protects his family. Mom, it won't happen again. It better not, because if it does, I'll disappear from your lives. Completely, and my money will disappear with me. The threat was implicit but clear. David nodded quickly. I understand. We want you in our lives. Mom, things will be better. I flew back to Paris that afternoon with mixed feelings. I was glad I'd seen Emma, but I wasn't optimistic about my relationship with David and Claire improving genuinely. They wanted access to my money and my help with the baby, but I doubted their attitudes toward me had really changed. Philippe met me at the airport with flowers and a warm smile. As we drove through Paris toward home, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. This was where I belonged now. How do you feel? Philippe asked, as we sat in our living room that evening. Sad but free, I said. I think I finally understand that I can't make people respect me. I can only choose to be around people who do. And your granddaughter, I'll be part of her life, but from a distance. Maybe that's better anyway. I can be the grandmother who takes her to Paris and shows her that women can be independent and strong. Philippe took my hand. You are the strongest woman I know. 6 months later, Philippe and I were married in a small ceremony at the local town hall, followed by lunch at our favorite restaurant. Marie and Jean-Claude were our witnesses, and David and Claire sent a card, but didn't attend. I wasn't surprised or hurt by their absence. By then, I'd built a life that didn't depend on their approval. David visits once or twice a year now, usually when he needs something. Claire is polite but distant, and I'm fine with that. I send gifts for Emma and video chat with her regularly. When she's older, I'll bring her to Paris and teach her about art and literature and the importance of standing up for herself. My life in Paris is rich and full. Philippe and I travel together, explore new neighborhoods, and host dinner parties for our friends. I've started volunteering at a local literacy center, teaching English to immigrants. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have a purpose beyond being someone's wife or mother. Sometimes I think about that terrible dinner party, about Claire's cruel words that cut so deeply. She meant to diminish me, to put me in my place. Instead, she set me free. She forced me to discover who I could be when I wasn't trying to please everyone else. I learned that I'm braver than I thought, more adaptable than I imagined, and worthy of love and respect just as I am. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over, to choose happiness over obligation, to choose people who lift you up instead of tear you down. My daughter-in-law thought she was punishing me by making me feel unwelcome in my son's life. What she actually did was push me toward the best chapter of my life. And for that, despite everything, I'm grateful.